Doing the preface to the revised edition, a study of the old commentators, to ignore whose great labor would indeed be a sin, also shows how freely they commented upon the holy book. The great service which they have done to the cause of truth would indeed have been lost to the world if they had looked upon their predecessors as uttering the final word on the exposition of the Holy Qur'an, as many theologians do today. It is a matter of no small pleasure to me that many of the special features of my translation, as noted above, have been adopted by later Muslim translators of the Holy Qur'an. The introductory notes to chapters, giving the abstract of each chapter and showing its connection with what has gone before, have been especially appreciated. Even in the matter of interpretation, most of the views adopted by me have found acceptance with them. The following quotations from the Muslim World, July 1931. Reverend Zwerner's Quarterly would furnish interesting reading in this connection. A careful comparison of Mr. Pickthall's translation with that of the Ahmadiyya translator, Maulvi Muhammad Ali, shows conclusively that Mr. Pickthall's work is not very much more than a revision of the Ahmadiyya version. Page 289. We have made a thorough examination of about 40 verses in the second chapter, 60 verses in the third, 40 verses in the 19th, and of all the last 15 chapters, comparing his renderings with those of Sale, Rodwell, Palmer, and Muhammad Ali, as well as with the Arabic. In this careful investigation, we have come to the conclusion that Mr. Pickthall's translation, in all that part of his work which we have examined, resembles very closely the version of Muhammad Ali. The difference being between the two versions in many passages being merely verbal. 290. Now, if we compare the above passage 357 through 63 with the versions of S, R, and P, you shall see that Mr. Pickthall is very much nearer to M.A. than he is to any of the three previous translators, so that one gets the impression that although he may have taken a word here and there from R and P, yet he has not followed them so closely as he obviously followed M.A. The dependence of Mr. Pickthall upon the work of M.A. is also indicated in an occasional footnote, and those who will compare these footnotes with the notes in the 1920 edition of M.A., which contains his commentary, will find that throughout Chapter 2, almost every footnote is based on the Ahmadiyya commentator. Well, if they're both Muslim commentators, and therefore having a certain amount of carefulness about the historical narrations and such, are the interpretation indicating that one can go along with it, you don't have to, that doesn't have to be the case, but we think it will now be evident to the reader how much Mr. Pickthall is indebted to the version of Maulvi Muhammad Ali, not only for his footnotes, but also for the translation itself. Page 293 again, and a quote from 294. By comparing these two passages with Mr. Sarwar's rendering, given on page 133 of the last issue of this journal, it will be seen that both Mr. Sarwar and Mr. Pickthall have followed M.A. very closely. Page 294. In the passages which we have examined carefully, namely the verses at the beginning of the second, third, and 19th Suwar, and the last 15, the translation of Pickthall follows M.A. so closely that one finds Very few evidences of original work, page 297. Well, they're all going off the same thing, right? Similar verses have been expressed by other writers. Thus, the author of Islam in its True Light calls this translation a leading star for subsequent similar Muslim works, page 69, and mentions both Sarwar and Mr. Pickthall as following closely this translation. The reason is not far to seek. My work was a collection of labor. For every rendering or explanation, I had to search hadith collections, lexicologies, commentaries, and other important works, and every opinion expressed was substantiated by quoting authorities. Differences there have been in the past, and in future too, there will be differences, but wherever I have differed, I've given my authority for the difference. Moreover, the principle I've kept in view with this translation and commentary, i.e., seeking the explanation of a problem-like point, first of all, from the Holy Qur'an itself, has kept me nearest to the truth, and those who study Al-Qur'an closely will find very few occasions to differ with me. The Christian writer of the article in the Muslim World, from which I have quoted above, concludes with the following words. One cannot read far in the translation of Maulvi Muhammad Ali are in his notes without being convinced that before he began his work on Al-Quran, he was already widely read in the Arabic authorities listed on page 60, to which frequent reference is made in his notes. Also, his quotations from Lane's lexicon indicate that he was not altogether oblivious to the results of European scholarship, page 303. And then it is added, it is a pity that his work is so saturated with the peculiar doctrines of the Ahmadiyya sect and with bitter denunciation of Christian teachings, that the results of his Oriental scholarship have been seriously vitiated. Well, if he's commentating according to his own beliefs, then that's what he's doing. I may here add that it is not only in having recourse to Lane's lexicon that I have taken advantage of European scholarship. For a full 9 years before taking up this translation, I was engaged in studying every aspect of the European criticism of Islam, as well as of Christianity and religion in general, as I had specially to deal with these subjects in the Review of Religions, for which I was the first editor. I had thus an occasion to go through both the higher criticism of religion by advanced thinkers and what I may call the narrower criticism of Islam by Christian missionaries who had no eye for the broader principles of Islam and its cosmopolitan teachings, and the unparalleled transformation wrought by Islam. The talk of Ahmadiyya doctrines is, however, nothing but false propaganda. Because the Ahmadiyya claimed a new prophet. So if people, materially, maybe they didn't focus on what they should have if they were trying to, claim some stuff, but what those accusations are, maybe we'll come across that. The faith of Islam is one, and all sects of Islam are one so far as the essential doctrines of Islam are concerned. They believe that in the Qur'an in full, and they believe, well, I guess until the Semitters under Rashid Khalifa, people all believe, it was all that the Qur'an in full was believed, and whatever was actually the sayings of the Prophet, that's what one did. Same 5 pillars, and there are differences in interpretation, but they all relate to minor and secondary points. The Christian reviewers combining together the peculiar doctrines of the Ahmadiyya sect and bitter denunciation of the Christian teachings, lets the cat out of the bag so far as the criticism of the false church doctrines of Trinity. Okay, so that's where they're going, is they're saying, oh, it's sonship and atonement is concerned. The doctrines are so emphatically denounced in plain words in Al-Qur'an itself that no commentator need be better. What offends the Christian missionary and what he calls the peculiar doctrines of the Ahmadiyya sect are no more than expression of the opinion that Jesus Christ did not bodily ascend to heaven and is not alive there, and that he died a natural death like other prophets. There is not a single doctrine of the religion of Islam in which this translation differs with Orthodox views. I hope to be excused for clearing up this point by a quotation from Mr. Pickthall's review of my Religion of Islam and the Islamic Culture for October of 1936. Probably no man living has done longer or more valuable service for the cause of Islamic revival than Maulvi Muhammad Ali of Lahore. In our opinion, the present volume is his finest work, and there are dots, so I wonder, there must have been some criticism or something in there. It is a description of al-Islam by one well-versed in the Sunnah, who has on his mind the shame of the Muslim decadence of the past 5 centuries, which can't be attributed to Islam. It's Westernization, and Westernization not only bringing in some changes in the laws, but the very same things, which tend to be less common, that Muslims are criticized for otherwise. And in his heart, the hope of revival, of which signs can now be seen on every side, without moving a hair's breadth from the traditional position with regard to worship and religious duties, the author shows a wide field in which changes are lawful and may be desirable, because here the rules and practices are not based on an ordinance of Al-Qur'an or on an edict of the Prophet, peace be upon him. Mr. Pickthall was an Orthodox Muslim, and, well, isn't everybody supposed to try to be a correctly believing Muslim? But I'm presuming he means a conservative. And what he has said of the religion of Islam is true of this translation. There is not a hair's breadth departure from the essentials of Islam, and this translation does not contain anything contrary to the views of the greatest imams and learned Ahl Sunnat that have gone before, that there have been differences in the interpretation of the Holy Qur'an among the greatest commentators, among even the companions of the Holy Prophet, and the great imams cannot be denied. So something that you're not used to is not quite the same thing as, it sounds like I'm not familiar with this comment, so it can't be, any study can indicate, even pick up the hadith books, the companions would. And sometimes the Prophet would even say that they were, when he was around, he would even say that sometimes they were all right. But these differences do not relate to the essentials of the faith of Islam, in which all Muslimin are agreed. They relate to minor or secondary points. All Muslimin believe in the unity of God and the Prophet of Muhammad. They believe in all the prophets of God and in his books. They believe that divine revelation came to perfection with the Prophet Muhammad, who is thus the last of the prophets. Khatam al-Nabiyyun, after whom no prophet will come, and the Holy Qur'an is the last divine message for the whole of humanity. All these doctrines find clear expression in my translation and the explanatory footnotes. The only important matters wherein I may be said to have differed with the majority relates to the death of Jesus Christ, which the Quran doesn't make it necessary for him to be flying about the sky or whatever people say. And it's interesting that in the first century after Muhammad died, it doesn't seem there's any remnant of this belief. But in the first place, the belief that Jesus is alive somewhere in the heavens has never been included among the essentials of Islam. It has never been included among the religious doctrines of the faith of Islam. There are Muslimin who still believe that 4 prophets are alive: Khidr, Idris, Elias, and Jesus Christ. But that is not an article of faith with any Muslim. Many learned Muslimin have held such belief regarding the first 3 to be based on Israelite stories and having nothing to support it in the Holy Quran and authentic Hadith. They are not looked upon as unorthodox for that reason. Why should this translation be looked on as unorthodox for saying the same thing about a belief in Jesus Christ being alive? I may call the reader's attention to another fact as well. Most learned Muslimin all over the world, if not all, are today convinced that Jesus Christ died like other prophets, and many of them have given expression to such views, among them being the famous Mufti Muhammad Abduhu Sayyid Rashid Rada of Egypt. Now, in Islam, we don't believe that they murdered him, but again, saying that Jesus wasn't murdered in the Quran, or that before his death that people were to believe in him, although they covered that faith, or before the death of the Christians and Jews who hear mention of Jesus, that they're going to have the right belief in there somewhere. That interpretation doesn't mesh with the idea that maybe Jesus was already dead either, but I may be excused for quoting 2 other orthodox views about this translation. Maulana Abd al-Majid Daryabadi, editor of Such Lucknow, who is now recognized leader of Orthodox Muslim opinion. Wait, is that one translation over here? Wrote on the 25th of June, 1943, to deny the excellence of Maulvi Muhammad Ali's translation, the influence it has exercised, and its proselytizing utility would be to deny the light of the sun. The translation certainly helped in bringing thousands of non-Muslimin to the Muslim fold and hundreds of thousands of unbelievers much nearer Islam. Speaking my own self, I gladly admit that this translation was one of the few books which brought me towards Islam 15 or 16 years ago, and I was groping in darkness, atheism and skepticism. Even Maulana Muhammad Ali, all of the comrade, was gradually enthralled by this translation and had nothing but praise for it. Now, here we have the view of not one, but 2 great Orthodox leaders of Islam. I would add only one more Orthodox leader's view to show that there is not the least ground for the false propaganda that this translation is saturated with any unorthodox or heretical views. Well, there are a few, but it is the Urdu paper Wakil, which was published from Amritsar, and which both the editor and the proprietor were Orthodox Muslimin. Its review of this translation, when it was first issued, was in the following words: "We have seen the translation critically, and have no hesitation in remarking that the simplicity of its language and the correctness of the version are inviolable. The writer has kept his annotations together, free from sectarian influence, with wonderful impartiality, and has gathered together the wealth of authentic Muslim theology. He has also displayed great skill and wisdom in using the new weapons of defense and refuting the objections of the opponents of Islam." And a good translation of the Quran will naturally do that. As I have already stated, I have throughout this translation quoted authorities wherever I have differed with previous translators or commentators, or with certain views generally held by Muslimin, but which are not supported by the Holy Qur'an or by authentic hadith of the Prophet. Now, that authentic hadith thing is, a lot of that's sectarian. They should first turn to the Quran and science, and by science I also include the science of hadith in determining what a authentic hadith is, rather than some stuff that has been included in that mention. In the revised edition, I have laid even greater emphasis on this point. In the case of hadith collections, I have now given exact reference to book and chapter, which were wanting in the first edition, and have moreover made greater use of reliable hadith, where they explain the Quran, giving the greatest importance to Bukhari, Asab al-Kutub, Bada Kitab Allah, the most correct of the books, after the Book of God. Lexicons have also been resorted to on a vaster scale, and a complete index of the Arabic words and phrases explained has been added. The general index has been amplified, and headings have been added bearing on importance of subjects dealt with in Al-Quran. The serial numbers of footnotes are the same as in the first edition, though changes have been made in many cases and notes have been entirely changed in others. A large number of new notes has been added, and new numbers have been given to them. For instance, in the very first chapter, 2 footnotes have been added and given the numbers 8a and 8b. They follow footnote 8, while the introduction note to each chapter has been retained as it deals with the subject matter of the chapters and explains the relation of the different sections to each other, as also the relations of different chapters. The abstract of the sections given with each chapter has been restricted to the list of contents. The abstract of verses given at the head of each section has been omitted, the connection of verses being pointed out where necessary in the footnotes. The margin of the first edition has also been found unnecessary. Alternative interpretations and cross-references being given where necessary in the footnotes. As regard to the translation itself, I have tried to make it simpler, though still adhering to the principle adopted in the first edition of being faithful to the Arabic text. Changes have also been made in the subjects discussed in the first preface, finding place now in the introduction. The subject of the purity of the Quranic text was very important, as throwing light on the collection and arrangement of the Holy Book. You know, you find references for every chapter and verse, really. And it has been retained with some changes, but the summary of the teachings of Islam has been omitted, as it is now circulated free on a very large scale under the name Islam, the Religion of Humanity, and is easily accessible. Details of the Islamic institution of prayer are also obtainable separately and have been omitted from the introduction. In the place of these new and important subjects have been inserted to afford facility to the reader in understanding the Holy Quran itself. And the 18th of January 1951, Muhammad Ali. And yeah, this, I mean, not this particular physical book, but this printing. I saw one in the library in the 90s, and it's the first one I did my sort of speed reading thing, I guess, that I do when I get new books, because this was in the reference section. One of these was in the reference section, and in the reference section, I, tried to give a good read through, and I was impressed. It wasn't the racist, sadomasochistic sort of religion that I initially got it projected upon me. If I recall right, I had conversations that kind of left that impression. I don't remember anything to support that, but, I guess I put things away for a couple years, you could say, after that point. And by racist, I mean particularly against myself because I'm white, Seriously, that's the impression, that is given you about Islam, that it's racist against white people. Now, the thing blurry-eyed, blue with sickness is not the same thing as having blue in the eyes, and it wasn't some it wasn't against any race, but, the black Muslims. By that, I don't mean the people who had dark color. I mean the people who made it a black supremacy, black power sort of thing. And the white devil and all that. I mean, certainly some people, but, devils on the other, devils of other colors too. And of course, the Shia beating it themselves, but most of the Shia don't believe that. And most of them that say they believe it don't do it. So there's that to consider. But the Ahmadiyya, there is authentic narrations. There are what you could say are authentic narrations, but as I said, they don't exist till a certain point. But there's few comparatively. For such an issue that's considered of importance, one would think that there'd be more narrations to the effect.